he talked about some in Europe that have done the right thing. He's not going to name them, but there are some that have done the right thing, and others could learn from them. I wonder whether he will go further during his visit there and single out some of those people, especially given some of the interesting things he had to say about Emmanuel Macron and his decision to come out and back Palestinian statehood. He very brusquely brushed off those comments by effectively saying, Emmanuel's all right, but he doesn't get much right. So it certainly could be a fiery set of meetings that he has during his time in Scotland, particularly given that we know Ursula von der Leyen is coming to visit him, I think, tomorrow.
But I'm joined now by the Sunday Times political editor Caroline Wheeler for analysis on the top political stories. Great to have you here, Caroline. And we must all give out thanks and cheers for a new political party on the firmament.
Yes, absolutely. A new political party is obviously going to cause some interesting times for the government, yet more interesting times for the government. Not only a insurgent party from the right, but now an insurgent party from the left as well.
Yes. I've seen it written that at best this party, which is, of course, jointly formed by Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana, might at best hope to get something in the region of 10% of the vote. But its ramifications are broader than that, aren't they? Firstly, just very plainly, electorally for Labour.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing that we have to remember about the election victory last year was that although it was a stonking majority for Sir Keir Starmer, actually, as commentators at the time were very keen to point out, it was a sort of Loveless landslide that often some of those seats were won by a very small majority, partly because there was such kind of split and divide in the votes, which means that actually, even if you're talking about, only 10% potential impact, if you actually transpose that to some of the seats across the country, it could make a very big difference really to the majority, or even the ability for the Labour Party to win an outright majority at all. So I think there will be some jitters about how that could split the vote, given that they're already claiming that hundreds of thousands of people have joined this new party without a name, which, given that it's in its infancy, does suggest that it could have some size ramifications. However, the caveat to all of this is that it is very early days. We don't know quite what the sort of party recognition is going to be because it hasn't been tested electorally at all yet. But we do know that there was already an appetite at the last election for some of those independent candidates that stood on particular issues, such as, for example, Gaza and Israel and the Palestine conflict. And of course, if Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana make that a big kind of feature of their campaign, I think that it could spell some trouble for Sir Keir Starmer's party. But as I say, it's early days.
There's a good 25 or 30 Labour seats where the Muslim vote, though not a majority, is pretty crucial. And we saw at the last election the proportion of Muslim voters who put their cross beside a Labour candidate decrease from somewhere in the region of 70% back in the old days to somewhere nearer 30-40%. So there's real damage to be done there, isn't there, in Birmingham, in Bradford, in East London and so on. What can Keir Starmer do to shore up his Muslim vote?
Well, I'm sure that that's something that he will be thinking about. And indeed, it's interesting that you talk about those particular areas of the country. For example, Birmingham, where Shabana Mahmood is the Justice Secretary and also a local MP there. But also in East London, where the likes of Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, are also candidates. And you can see already that those really devastating scenes that are coming out of Gaza at the moment are having a real impact on kind of Labour backbench sentiment. They're watching this and are really worried about not just obviously what's happening on the ground. I would hate to suggest that MPs are only ever concerned about their own majorities and their electoral success, but at the back of their minds, they will be thinking ultimately about how that translates. And so we have seen this kind of rather big sort of development over the last couple of days of those cabinet ministers, including Wes Streeting and Shabana Mahmood, on the record, coming out and talking about their desire to see Palestine recognised as a state. But the problem that I have with all of this is that it doesn't change anything on the ground. It's not going to suddenly eradicate, starvation and hunger in Gaza. It is much more symbolic than anything else. And even the suggestions that they're going to introduce new airdrops to help the Jordanians get some of that humanitarian aid into the ground in Gaza is all very much too little, too late. And I think that, even MPs who are desperately worried about that will admit that this is very much more symbolic. It's very much more aimed to put pressure on Netanyahu and the Israeli government to think again about a ceasefire and letting, further aid trucks in. But, I think that it will be something that is worrying those on the backbenches and those with small majorities in those areas, as you've mentioned, that they will worry that they will be seen at the end of the day not to have done enough on this issue and not to have brought their constituents with them on it.
Well, exactly, and that's a good point. And the other point for Sir Keir Starmer, of course, is presumably a worry that there may be those disaffected on his backbenches, particularly amongst the usual suspects, the likes of Richard Bergen, possibly Clive Lewis, who may defect. There must be a fear of some sort of defection.
Yes, I think there is. I mean, I think that it's been kind of doing the rounds for some time now that there are a number of MPs that will be thinking hard about where their sort of natural home lies, particularly given some of the eruptions that we've seen over some of those other issues on the kind of soft left around welfare changes, for example. But as I say, it is early days, and some of those MPs have already lost the whip at least once because of some of the decisions that they've made. But I think that they will wait and watch and see how it develops, because at the end of the day, they won't want to do anything that will risk them losing their seats at the next election. And we still have 4 years to go until we next go to the polls.
Yeah.
So, I wouldn't be at all surprised if we saw some of them bide their time or choose their moment very carefully at a moment of kind of, maximum devastation for the government when there are those uncomfortable issues that will inevitably come up, whether it be on the foreign policy end of the scale or whether it be on those kind of more domestic focused issues such as welfare cuts, for example.
Well, we'll be talking about this later in the programme with the leader of the Green Party and indeed a defector from the Labour Party. So thanks for that. Now, President Trump has arrived in Scotland and he said that immigration is killing Europe. Quotes, "You'd better get your act together or you're not going to have Europe anymore. You've got to get your act together." That's throwing oil on troubled waters, isn't it? Don't you think?
It is. And, I don't think I'm not surprised by the comments that he's made. I mean, he himself would sort of point to Joe Biden's record on all of this as suggesting that had very much been part of the key to his own victory in the White House. And he will see certain sort of historic trends, I suspect, in what has happened in the United States with the rest of Europe. But I mean, it's a cautionary tale. I think, and something that I think we will likely hear more about. But I mean, the thing I was most fascinated about was he talked about some in Europe that have done the right thing. He's not going to name them, but there are some that have done the right thing and others could learn from them. I wonder whether he will go further during his visit there and single out some of those people, especially given some of the interesting things he had to say about Emmanuel Macron and his decision to come out and back Palestinian statehood. He very brusquely brushed off those comments by effectively saying, Emmanuel's all right, but he doesn't get much right. So it certainly could be a fiery set of meetings that he has during his time in Scotland, particularly given that we know Ursula von der Leyen is coming to visit him, I think, tomorrow.
Yes, I have the feeling that old Viktor Orban may have been in his mind.
I was wondering that myself. Possibly yes. Giorgia Meloni, although, of course, Italy's not gone without its own problems on that front.
No, no, indeed. Well, they are going to talk today, aren't they? I suppose what can we expect to be on the agenda, assuming that Donald Trump is in a good mood, having won a couple of rounds of golf today?
Well, I think golf is definitely one of the subjects that the Prime Minister would not want to be talking about. He's very definitely not a golfer. I had a few chats with him about that in the last week, just in a kind of more social context, and I think he's rather hoping that he might be able to persuade the president to consider a game of football, which is much more his game. But I think he might be disappointed on that front. I'm not sure that, other than Donald Trump's appearance at the recent Chelsea victory, that he's desperately interested in that sport. But yes, on a more serious level, I mean, I think you can expect that they'll want to talk about the trade deal that's just been done. They'll both want to sort of celebrate the victory that they see that as. I mean, even touching down yesterday, Donald Trump talked about Sir Keir Starmer as being a good man because he had managed to persuade him to sign a trade deal, one of the few countries that have managed to do that thus far since he started imposing those tariffs. But of course, look, the Middle East is front and centre at the moment. You know, there's no getting away from those pictures on the front page of those scenes in Gaza, of those comments that those are making about the starvation that people are facing in the country. So I think they'll use it as an opportunity to talk about renewing those talks around the prospect of a ceasefire, using the Egyptians and the Qataris as the peace brokers. So I'm sure that will come up. And of course, the situation in Ukraine remains one that's unresolved, despite the president's claims before he entered the White House that he could solve the situation within 24 hours. That hasn't come to pass. So I'm sure, once again, that will be something that the Prime Minister will want to press him on.
Yeah, indeed, it hasn't come to pass. Where are we currently with negotiations over the resident doctors, formerly the artists formerly known as the junior doctors, of course, and the current threatened strike?
I think we're in a big stalemate, actually. I've rarely seen such bad-tempered exchanges on both sides. I mean, that's not to forget that we've been here before. You know, during the last government's tenure, there were 44 days of strikes. And so we know how this kind of playbook goes. But, I mean, it does feel, and particularly talking to those close to the health secretary, that they really thought that they'd gone above and beyond to come up with a package of measures that would be acceptable to the junior doctors, on the basis that they were very clear that they couldn't go anywhere on pay because they'd already had this bumper pay rise that was agreed as the Labour administration came in. And I think that the health secretary felt that he'd come up with some innovative answers and solutions to that, looking at all sorts of other things, from, you know, reducing the cost of exams to even looking at student finance, although that was never going to be a quick fix. And those that I've spoken to have said they were genuinely astonished because the most substantive round of talks they had on the 17th of July, the issue of pay was only obliquely referenced. That's certainly the claim from the Department of Health side. And so they felt that they were involved in a kind of negotiation that was based on good faith, that both sides were trying to do everything that they could to avert strike action. And so I think that Wes Streeting in particular was really surprised by the decision, unanimous decision by the BMA to support this strike action. And I think, you know, what I hear now is that, you know, this strike action itself has made the appetite to go to the table much less, but also their ability to do anything much less, because of course these strikes cost hundreds of millions of pounds. I think the strike action in the last bout cost something around £1.5 billion. And so that eats into any kind of possible war chest that they might have to do something more constructive.
Yes, it's not looking good, is it? Caroline Wheeler, thanks so much for coming in this morning.